Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Conversations with Nicole Show. I'm Nicole Huckabee. My guest today is Carla Purvis, affectionately known as the Low Tox Queen. Carla is a holistic health and nutrition coach on a mission to help people eliminate toxins from their diets and make healthier choices. As the host of the Toxic Truths podcast, Carla shares practical insights on living a low tox lifestyle, offering tips on how to choose better food, avoid harmful ingredients, and improve overall wellness. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Conversations with Nicole Show. I am delighted to have as my guest today Carla Purvis. She is known as the Low Tox Queen on Instagram. She's all about helping us ditch the toxins and live a healthier life. Carla, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So, I listen to a lot of podcasts, a lot of health and wellness, and I have become very aware that we've been doing a lot of things wrong over the years. And it seems finally people are catching on that we need to be looking more on the labels as to what's in it, trying to eat clean, trying to live healthier lives, get rid of the plastic bottles and that sort of thing. So tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you came into being the low tox queen.
Yes, thank you for having me. So my journey
Yes.
actually started 10 years ago. So it didn't start off as being the low tox queen or even in holistic health and wellness. So it just started off as a fitness journey for me. So I was a college student and I was working part-time, and all my life I grew up playing sports. But once I got to college and life got busy, I found myself drifting more away from sports and, more into working and, hanging out with friends. I had just turned 21 and I was partying and hanging out, on the weekends. And, after, I would say about 6 months of, going out on the weekends, like every Friday and Saturday, going to the bars with friends and just socially drinking, it really started to catch up to me. And it caught up to the point where I have always been in shape my whole entire life, but at this time I had gained 30 pounds, so I was nearing 150 pounds. And for someone that's 5'1" to 5'2",
Wow.
you're overweight. And, I went from a small to a large, and I realized that I had to make a change. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the small that I always was. And I feel like I took that for granted. You never really think about, gaining weight and what that could do for you mentally, physically, and emotionally. So that's when I was first introduced to the gym for the first time in my life. And I started to work out and I really fell in love with it. I fell in love with the process to the point where I did end up becoming a certified personal trainer and taking clients, very part-time. It wasn't anything that I was doing full-time, but it was a part-time adventure. And as I got further and further into my weight loss journey and working out, I really, I started to come across this term gluten-free, which has gotten a lot of spark over the years. And I kind of thought, now I have a different thought, but back then I thought, eating gluten-free was really the gold mine for me to lose weight, because I had heard, gluten-free, you could lose weight. But over time and even now, I realize that it's not just about gluten-free, but the real power, is really being able to read and understand labels, because you could be eating something gluten-free, but it doesn't really mean that it's clean.
Right.
And I see that a lot, when I'm out shopping. So fast forward, so I ended up obviously losing the weight. And in 2020, that's when I really woke up and I started reading labels, because I had two cancer scares prior to 30. So I had an oral cancer scare and I also had breast cancer scare, and cancer runs in my family. So it was enough for me to wake up and, for the first time ever, I thought, this can't be random, and luckily I did not have cancer, but it was a wake up call, that what I was doing, it wasn't enough. Something had to change. And then I started coming across, a lot of influencers online that were talking about ingredients and labels, and it all started to click. Like I never understood a label. Reading labels to me, when I had first tried reading labels, I did it for maybe a week or two and I quit because it was just too much work.
It
And
is
then,
complicated.
yes, it's super complicated. I'm like, it's gonna take me, forever to shop. But then as I really started to sit down and, I have a structured approach where I was like, okay, well, like let's start basic with this. Let's start with avoiding, these 5 ingredients or these 10 ingredients. And, over time, it got to a point where I was able to, it would take me less than 10 seconds to read a label because I knew that I didn't want a product with gums, artificial flavors, or natural flavors. And I think that a lot of people, they get intimidated by the labels because they don't understand. And that's why I created the Low Tox Queen, because through my own struggles and, having to learn to read labels from the ground up, I didn't have anyone directly coaching me. This was all just, little bits and pieces that I would see on Instagram, and then doing the deep dive search, it really inspired me to start sharing my journey. And I just created my Instagram less than 6 months ago. It's actually only 60 days old. And but I had been doing this behind the scenes, for the past 2, 3 years, and from a lot of encouragement, from people around me. They're like, "You have to share this. Like, people have to know this." There's people out here that really this is life saving, and it truly is, because growing up for me, I was taught that obviously cancer is a bad thing, but I never really taught the root cause of where it comes from and how you can preventively take measures to reduce your possible chances and risk exposure to getting it. I always thought of it's like, oh, it's random. And then as I started doing the research and looking at studies, I realized that it's not just random. Most of the time, it does come from directly what are you putting in your body, and the amount of toxins that people are putting in their body daily. As soon as they wake up, they're taking a shower, in water that's not filtered. They're taking a shower in tap water. They're drinking it. I mean, it starts from the very beginning, and a lot of people get overwhelmed. And I say just start small. Don't go home and throw out all of your products. But as you start to
Well, it
replace
can get
products,
costly too. I mean, you're like, oh my
yeah,
gosh,
it
I just
gets
spent all this
very,
money
yes.
on all of these things, and now you're telling me I can't have these things. So that's great to tell someone, don't panic, start small.
Start small, exactly. And that's the thing, start with 1 or 2 products, and as you're switching them out, make better informed decisions. And it does get costly, sometimes it does get to the point where you have to start with the top 5 products. Like, what are the most top 5 products that you use more often? That you're constantly using and exposing yourself to, these toxic chemicals.
That that's amazing. Your story is amazing. Did
Thank
not
you.
realize your story was that intense, where you really just said, I've got to change something because of how I felt and how I had become in my lifestyle. So when you talk about all of us feeling so overwhelmed, and the world says, you take these things, use these things, there's marketing, it can get confusing. When you started out on your journey, what would be the advice you'd give someone to help them make the changes that you did so that you can feel better? What are the steps to take and to look for
So
from
honestly,
products?
like we were saying, it can be quite an investment. So let's start with the free options, drinking 100 ounces of water. Even if you can't afford, a water filter system or a water pitcher, at least be able to, add some minerals back into your water, and you can just add sea salt, Redmond sea salt, Celtic sea salt, and they're usually under $10, versus like the $50 supplements for trace minerals. So, drinking your water, making sure that you replenish those minerals in your water, working out, getting vitamin D, sunlight, important, getting in those 10,000 steps or whatever step goals you have, minimizing your screen time, you know, and really just starting there with those things, drinking your water, minimizing your screen time, and moving your body. Start with the free things that you can do. And then as budgets increase and get better, start with small swaps. When you're shopping for food, you don't have to buy everything organic. And just because something reads an organic label doesn't mean it's clean. And that's the power of really understanding labels, because so often, I just had a brand, they sent me some organic pasta, and I was super excited to try it. And I read the ingredients, and they weren't up to my standards. They had gum, natural flavors, and this is coming from an organic brand that's charging, $10+ for pasta.
Right.
versus, you can go to a grocery store like Aldi or, or Lidl or more, financially, um,
Yes. Those are
you know,
great places to shop that have
yeah,
really
more budget
unique,
friendly places.
cool items, and they are budget friendly. That's great
Yes.
tip there. Yes.
Exactly, and it comes down to the power of reading ingredients. You can save so much time and money because not everything that's organic is clean. And I would tell anyone, really start if you really want to do this on a whole budget, and you're starting with food, eat whole foods. Don't spend a lot of money on processed foods and snacks. Get whole foods, get some grass-fed beef, get some organic chicken, get eggs, just eat whole foods and pair it with like veggies and fruits. And that'll really minimize your grocery bill because a lot of people, they'll try to purchase where they're getting everything organic. They're spending a lot of money on, I mean, even though the snacks are organic and they're clean, they're still processed. So you want to
Right.
eat a
That's true.
minimally processed diet, especially if you're on a budget.
So, that sounds good, but the Doritos and the chips and all that, they're so yummy.
Yeah.
How did you make this shift, really mind and body to get away from those types of, really they aren't foods, they're just stuff put together to make something,
Exactly.
right? But how do you get to that point where you're willing to go, I know that's bad for me, even though it is so stinking good, to putting something else in your body that's better and finding joy in it? Because, so much joy comes from food for people. It's not just fuel. It's our parties that we have together. It's family gatherings, So how do you transition yourself mentally and physically to be able to like the things that are better for us?
Honestly,
I mean, that
it
makes
is.
like it makes sense. I want to eat the eggs and all that, but if I'm looking at the donut, I don't know, right?
Yeah, so it really does come down to trial and error, and luckily, it took time. This wasn't something overnight. It took me trying different brands of snacks. There's some clean snacks that I won't eat because I don't like them. But luckily, two brands that really saved me, Siete and Simple Mills. They make amazing,
They
amazing
do.
snacks,
They
and
do.
I'm obsessed with those snacks.
I
So
love the Simple Mills crackers.
yes, the cookies taste just like Chips Ahoy cookies without the junk. And that's what it comes down to is really finding foods that you align with and not being too hard on yourself, and I'm not the type of person where, if I'm out for someone's birthday and they have cake, I'm not going to eat it, right? Because I wouldn't say I'm necessarily all about balance because I feel like some people really take advantage of that threshold and they'll be like, "Oh, balance, balance," but then, more often than not, they're not balancing. But I'm really about building sustainable habits that you can incorporate every day so that if you're traveling or if you're at an event and you go off of your norm, it's not going to derail you because you have those habits. So I would say the most important part in this journey is really starting small and building sustainable habits that, no matter where life takes you, you can adjust. And, I'm at the point in my journey where, if I'm at a party and, someone offers me a Dorito, I will have it, but I won't necessarily go out and buy a bag of Doritos and bring them home. And it really just comes down to developing a healthy relationship with food, which takes time. And it's not always as simple. I think, in my case, I really had to expedite the process because I had these cancer scares and it was real life for me. It wasn't like, oh, I heard an influencer tell me, I need to stop eating Oreos or drinking or cookies, it really hit home for me when I got these cancer scares. And this was all before 30.
Yeah, you're so
So
young to have already had those kinds of scares so early. So it's
exactly.
good that you took that to heart and said, I had time. Everyone has time to change, but you had the opportunity to do it very early in life. So good for you for doing that, right?
Yes, exactly. So
So I'm just curious, going back to your personal journey, when you had gained a lot of weight, and there's so much talk about body positivity and you aren't the scale and all of that, but it sounds to me like it was, you did not feel good anymore
no,
about yourself.
I did it.
How were you able to say, first of all, tell me how you felt at that size and the things that you started to to change the small things to get back to where you felt good about you, where you
Yes.
felt healthy? Yeah.
So, to be honest, I was not comfortable in my own skin. Like I was saying, growing up, I was always a skinny girl, the fit girl, and skinny doesn't equal fit. But, I was always the in shape person, and I felt good about myself. And, the breaking point for me in this journey was I remember it was summertime, and in Maryland, it gets super, super hot and humid in the summer. And I had went to an outdoor wedding, and the dress that I wore was a large. And I remember just walking, and my legs they were stuck together, like the sweat and just everything. And it was in that moment, and I looked at the pictures, and I was like, I have to make a change. And honestly, the changes were, definitely, I was in college, I was working part-time, I was eating a lot of fast food, really learning how to cook and cooking more at home. At that point, I wasn't reading labels. I was just trying to get in a habit of not eating fast food and,
Sure.
cooking for myself, minimizing the alcohol. So, like I said, at that point in my life, I was drinking every Friday and Saturday. And 2 days out of the week doesn't sound like a lot, but it adds up. And, in with that, when I was drinking, I found myself going out to eat afterwards, Taco Bell, McDonald's, fast food, and all of
It's
those
the
habits.
layers of all of those things really that start to add up.
Exactly. And honestly, it all worked out because I had ended up meeting my husband during this time a few months later, and he's a few years older than me. So, we weren't, once I kind of, started to settle down, I wasn't going out all the time drinking. We were doing different things. So, definitely like being aware of your surroundings and who you're friends with. And I'm not saying that you can't be friends with people that drink or drink a lot, but you just have to know your limits and know and do what's comfortable for you because it had gotten to a point where I didn't realize that my habits, they might have been 2 days a week, but 2 days a week every week adds up.
Sure.
And for me, I didn't feel good. I remember having to buy all new clothes, going from a small to a large, and I knew in that moment like something had to change,
Yeah.
and you know, not that, the weight on the scale determines your health, but not only did I not look, I didn't feel good. I remember I had a lot of, bloating and gas and just I was sweaty all the time and I just didn't feel good. I was not energized,
Right.
and I knew that I just couldn't keep going like this.
I think you really hit the nail on the head. You didn't feel good, and you have to feel good about yourself to be able to live your best life. And if you're not feeling good about yourself and physically and mentally not there, you have to make a change. You have to do something different. And so you made all the changes. I'm sure, like you said, you started with them gradually, and all of a sudden you wanted to become an advocate of helping others do that. It's been incredible what you're doing. And now you are really making a difference with your Instagram account is helping people every day. So talk a little bit more about how you're helping people.
Yeah, so right now I'm helping people with just I'm creating a lot of content. So usually I go to one new store a week and I'll create a lot of different reels on foods. I'm now incorporating personal care products and really giving people a safe haven and a safe place that they can come to and to get reliable information. When they're shopping, I want to make it as seamless as possible. I don't want people to get, frustrated like I did and give up. I want people to really understand how to read labels, and I'm actually launching a new series called Toxic Truths next week, November the 4th, where every week I'll be going through and I'm creating a video, whether it's about an ingredient or it's about a myth, and how to really break the barrier, how to really understand how to read labels. Because I don't want to just create content where I'm telling people you need to buy this, you need to buy that. I want to educate and empower people to make those decisions for themselves. And that's what I'm going to be doing in that series. I'm really going to be focusing on what ingredients should you start with in your journey to start avoiding, what those ingredients are, why you need to avoid them. Here are swaps, to help with that journey. So really just giving people on Instagram the power to make better informed decisions for themselves and their family.
So that leads me to my next question. You talked about the free things that we can do. Uh, put put the salt minerals in our water. Look at the sun, get your sunlight, walk, do some things, get moving, those types of things. What would be next level? What are the things to look out for ingredient wise and also in our products, and then start making those small steps in a different way. Like you hear a lot about the plastic bottles, for instance. So walk me through some things that we, if, like, I'm ready to make that change. What's next after the free things you talked about?
Yeah, so start with the top 5 products, you use on a daily basis. So, I would encourage everyone to definitely get a water pitcher. You can actually get a filtered water pitcher for under $60. That's something that you definitely need to do because you're cooking with this water, you're drinking this water, you're consuming this water. So it's definitely something that you want to do. And alongside with getting a filtered water pitcher, you also want to make sure you're not showering in tap water. So you can get I got a shower filter for under $30 on Amazon. So I'm actually opening up an Amazon store where I'm going to be linking some items to definitely help keeping it budget friendly because, I know how important it is and, we're in a tough economy to keep up with this lifestyle. And I think that's another thing where people feel like, oh, well, it's too expensive to buy the better product or it's too expensive to buy organic. But it all comes down to, finding budget friendly options. And it does take time. And, that's what I want to alleviate for people is having to take that time to, go to all different types of websites. I want to create a central repository place where you can come, you can get your products and get them, at a decent price. So I would say definitely starting with your water. Next would be starting with your deodorant. So you can definitely get a budget friendly deodorant. It's going to be, anywhere from $20 to $30, which sounds like a lot, but, it does last, and it's important because those lymph nodes are directly connected. So, like I said, I had a breast cancer scare, and that was the first product that I changed out was my deodorant because the lymph nodes are very close. So I would say, starting with your deodorant, your water, your toothpaste. A lot of people are using toothpaste with fluoride, that has neurotoxins and all these other sorts of different things that are going straight to your brain, so switching out your toothpaste, would definitely be next step. And then I would move towards your cleaning products. What are you cleaning your environment? If you're eating healthy, or you're eating, I would say clean. And when I say clean, I don't mean, perfect. I mean clean as far as ingredients, like you're reading the label, but then you're spraying your area with Lysol. I mean, it defeats the purpose, right? So definitely, swapping out your cleaning products would be the next thing. And then the last thing for number 5 would be the plastic, because the amount of microplastics, I mean, even from drinking a bottle of water, it's microplastic exposure. And they did an experiment where you leave your water bottle in the car in the hot sun, and you come back to it and it tastes like plastics. It's like all those microplastics that are being released. So switching to glass Tupperware, it can be expensive, but Amazon, I was actually able to get some Tupperware that was glass for under $30. So I mean, really just kind of starting small. And I actually created a free guide on my page where I give you the top 5 swaps to make. And, to make this easier. And that's what I want to do. I want to empower people and encourage people because, a lot of people, say I had someone actually say to me earlier, I had posted a video about Low Tox Halloween candy, and they messaged me and they said, well, that's great, but they're not going to eat all that candy. And, the point is not necessarily that, the kids are going to eat all that candy, but I'm still giving you the power and the resources that if you want to buy a specific candy for your kids, they don't have the artificial food dyes, they don't have the natural flavors, they don't have the inflammatory oils. Here are your sources to try. They may not like them all, but, I feel like, too, the issue is that a lot of parents, they haven't educated themselves. So their kids are already in the habits, they're buying this food. Their kids are already in the habits of eating Doritos and Cheetos, that when they do bring home, something that's different, their kids don't want it. And, a lot of people say, well, their kids won't eat it. But, I think that comes down to, parents really taking the control and, you're the parent and they're the child. And, if you're buying the food, this is what I'm buying, this is what you're gonna need to eat. But, a lot of people, especially when it comes to, preconception, first time moms and just moms in general, like they aren't educated on this. This is still a very new concept. So, I don't have kids yet. So, I kind of, That's kind of the unique part about this, is that I have all this information so that when I do have kids, I'm able to start right and, instill those healthy habits. And I'm not saying that, parents that don't do this, their kids aren't going to be healthy, but it just really starts them off on the right foot. And then obviously as they get older, they can make their own decisions. But I think honestly, like, everyone can benefit from learning from this, because it's not just a fad. A lot of times, with things like this, people will be like, "Oh, well, it's just a fad." But I mean, this is real life. There's studies done, and it's real life that the toxins are out of control. Our food is not the same as it was. I mean, take Gatorade, for example. 20, 30 years ago, Gatorade was just water and electrolytes. Now they're adding artificial colors in there.
You do have to start making some changes. We could probably keep talking forever. I've got a list of things I need to change now, but I will say I have already been on the path of making changes. So I don't feel so bad that I'm not doing as well as I
Keep
should.
up the great work.
Well, isn't that the truth? I mean, we all are work in progress. So if we just keep making those swaps as we go, I have better cleaning products in my house now, changed some of the things that I use. Like, I do have a um, healthier deodorant that doesn't have the aluminum and all of that in it. So if we can try to do those things, we will be successful in our health as we go through life. So as we close, final thoughts on how people can follow you and anything that you would like for them to know about what you're doing.
Yeah, so please give me a follow on Instagram at the Low Tox Queen. I'm always on there. I'm usually posting at least 3 to 4, a lot of times 5 or 6 reels a week. I have some exciting things coming up. Like I said, I'm launching a new series called The Toxic Truths, and I have something else that's pretty big in the works that I won't say yet, but definitely follow me and stay tuned, because I would love to have you a part of the journey and in the community.
Sounds great. Carla, thank you so much for being my guest today. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. Thank
Right.
you for having me.
Absolutely. And that will do it for this edition of the Conversations with Nicole show. Until I see you again, I hope you have a great day.